When I returned from my 6-month work assignment, I discovered my family had changed the locks to my house and told the neighbours that Madison had moved away permanently. But they had no idea who I had become during those 6 months away. Hi everyone, I'm Madison, I'm 32 years old, and I'm the youngest of 4 children in my family. If you've ever felt overlooked or taken for granted by your own family, please hit that subscribe button. I promise by the end of this story, you'll see that sometimes staying quiet doesn't mean you're weak. It just means you're choosing your battles wisely. Growing up, I was always the easy child. You know the type, the one who never caused trouble, never complained, never asked for anything. While my older siblings threw tantrums to get what they wanted, I learned early that keeping the peace meant keeping quiet. My parents would always say, "Don't worry about Madison, she won't mind, she always gives in." Those words became the soundtrack of my childhood. When I was 16, my brother Michael needed money for his senior trip to Europe. $2,000. My parents sat us all down at the dinner table, and I watched as they turned to me with those expectant faces. "Madison, honey, you've been saving up from your part-time job at the grocery store. Michael really needs this opportunity. You understand, right?" What was I supposed to say? That I had been saving that money for my own senior trip the following year? That I had already put down a deposit? Of course I didn't say any of that. I just nodded and handed over my savings. Michael got his trip to Europe. I spent my senior year working double shifts to save up again, but by then my sister Emma needed money for her college application fees. The pattern continued through high school and into my early 20s. When Emma wanted to study abroad her junior year of college, guess who got asked to help with the $15,000 program fee? When my oldest brother David decided he wanted to start his own business, who do you think became his silent investor? Every time, the conversation was the same. "Madison's so understanding. She knows family comes first. She never makes a fuss about these things." But the moment that really opened my eyes happened when I was 24. I had finally saved enough money for my own apartment, a tiny studio, but it was going to be mine. I had already signed the lease, bought furniture, even picked out curtains. I was so excited to finally have my own space. The night before I was supposed to move in, my parents called a family meeting. My sister Emma was pregnant with her first child, and her boyfriend had just left her. She needed a place to stay, and of course, that place was going to be my new apartment. "You can wait another year or two, can't you, Madison?" my mother asked, her voice dripping with that particular tone that made disagreement seem selfish. "Emma really needs this right now. She's going through such a difficult time." I remember sitting there at our old kitchen table staring at the scratches in the wood that had been there since I was a child, feeling something inside me crack. Not break, not yet, but definitely crack. I looked around the table at my family, all of them nodding in agreement, all of them so certain that Madison would once again sacrifice what she wanted for what they needed. And I did. I gave Emma the apartment. I moved back into my childhood bedroom, sleeping in the same twin bed I'd had since I was 12, surrounded by faded posters of boy bands I'd outgrown a decade earlier. Emma lived in what should have been my first apartment for 3 years. By the time she moved out, the rent had gone up so much I couldn't afford it anymore. That's when I made a promise to myself I was going to buy a house. Not rent, buy. Something that would be mine, that no one could take away from me or guilt me into giving up. I worked 3 jobs for 4 years straight, mornings at an accounting firm, afternoons doing bookkeeping for small businesses, and weekends doing freelance tax preparation. I ate ramen noodles for dinner more nights than I care to admit. I drove a car that was older than some of my co-workers. I wore the same 3 professional outfits on rotation, mixing and matching them so people wouldn't notice. But I did it. At 28 years old, I bought my own house. Nothing fancy, a small 3-bedroom ranch in a quiet neighborhood about 20 minutes from downtown. But it had a front porch where I could drink my morning coffee, a backyard where I could plant a garden, and most importantly, it was mine. The deed had my name on it, Madison Claire Henderson, no one else's. The day I got the keys, I sat in my empty living room and cried, not sad tears, happy ones. For the first time in my life, I had something that was completely mine. My parents came to the housewarming party I threw, and I noticed how they walked through the rooms, commenting on the space, the potential, how nice it would be to have family gatherings here. Even then, I should have seen the warning signs. Over the next few years, my house became the default location for every family event. Easter dinner, Thanksgiving, Christmas morning, birthday parties for the grandchildren. I didn't mind at first. I was proud of my home and happy to share it. But gradually, I noticed that hosting these events meant I was also paying for them. The groceries, the decorations, the clean-up afterward. When I mentioned it once, my mother patted my arm and said, "Oh, honey, you know everyone's going through tough times right now. You're doing so well for yourself. It's nice that you can help out." And there it was again. Madison will help out. Madison won't mind. Madison always gives in. The pattern expanded beyond just hosting. My brother David started borrowing money regularly, never large amounts, 100 here, 300 there, emergency car repairs, unexpected medical bills, temporary cash flow problems with his business. He always promised to pay me back next month, and I always said yes, because what kind of sister would I be if I didn't help family in need? My sister Emma began dropping her kids off at my house for quick errands that turned into 8-hour babysitting sessions. Don't get me wrong, I love my niece and nephew, but spending every weekend watching them while Emma went out with friends wasn't exactly how I'd imagined spending my 30s. When I finally worked up the courage to mention that maybe we could work out a schedule, Emma got teary-eyed and said, "I thought you loved spending time with them." I guess I was wrong about having a supportive family. The guilt was immediate and overwhelming. Of course I loved spending time with them. Of course I wanted to be supportive. What kind of aunt would turn away her sister's children? But the breaking point came during my grandmother's funeral 2 years ago. My grandmother, my mom's mother, had always been special to me. She was the one person in my family who never made me feel like my feelings didn't matter. When she got sick, I was the one who took time off work to drive her to doctor's appointments. I was the one who stayed overnight at the hospital during her final weeks. And when she passed away, I was the one who organized and paid for her funeral, $12,000. That's what it cost to give my grandmother the send-off she deserved. A beautiful service at the church she'd attended for 60 years. Flowers that filled the sanctuary. A reception afterward where her friends and family could share memories. I handled every detail, from choosing her dress to writing her obituary to coordinating with the cemetery. The morning of the funeral, my family gathered at the church. We were supposed to process in as a family, with the immediate children and grandchildren forming a receiving line at the front. I arrived early, wearing the black dress I'd bought specifically for this day, carrying the framed photo of my grandmother that would sit beside her casket. My mother approached me as I was arranging the flowers one final time. "Madison, dear, we need to talk about the processional order." She had that tone again, the one that meant she'd already made a decision and was just informing me of it. "David will walk in first with his family, then Michael with his wife and children, then Emma with the kids. You can sit with your father and me in the second row." I stared at her, not understanding. What about the grandchildren's line? Aren't we all supposed to stand together? My mother's expression grew impatient. Well, yes, the grandchildren with families. You don't have children, Madison. It would look odd for you to stand up there alone. The words hit me like a physical blow. I had organised this entire funeral. I had paid for everything. I had been my grandmother's primary caregiver in her final months. But because I wasn't married, because I didn't have children, I wasn't considered part of the real family for her final farewell. But Mom, Madison, please don't make this difficult. Today is about honouring your grandmother, not about you. You understand, right? There it was again. You understand, right? Madison always understands. Madison never makes things difficult. I stood in that second row during my grandmother's funeral, watching my siblings receive condolences from the mourners, watching them accept sympathy for their loss, a loss I had carried more heavily than any of them. And that's when the crack in my heart that had started 8 years earlier finally split wide open. That night, after everyone had gone home and I was left to clean up the reception hall alone, I made another promise to myself. I was never again going to let my family treat me like the backup plan, the safety net, the one who would always give in. But old habits die hard, and family expectations die even harder. 2 months ago, I got the opportunity of a lifetime. The accounting firm where I'd been working for the past 6 years offered me a temporary promotion to regional director for their West Coast expansion. 6 months in California, leading a team of 20 people, overseeing the opening of 3 new branch offices. If I succeeded, the position would become permanent, along with a salary increase that would nearly double my income. The catch? I had to leave immediately, and I'd be gone for 6 months minimum. When I told my family about the opportunity over Sunday dinner at my house, their reactions were predictable. 6 months? My mother repeated, as if I'd said 6 years. That's such a long time to be away from family. David leaned back in his chair, the one at the head of my dining room table that he'd somehow claimed as his own over the years. What about your house? You can't just leave it sitting empty for half a year. That's asking for trouble. Michael nodded in agreement. Yeah, empty houses are targets for break-ins. Plus, what about maintenance? What if something goes wrong with the plumbing or the heating system? My sister Emma, who was cutting up chicken nuggets for her youngest, added, "And what about us? We have all our family events here. Where are we supposed to have Thanksgiving if you're not here?" I felt that familiar sensation. The walls closing in, the expectations mounting, the assumption that my life existed primarily to serve their needs. But this time something was different. Maybe it was the thought of that promotion, or maybe it was the memory of standing in that second row at my grandmother's funeral, but I found myself speaking up. "I'm taking the job," I said quietly but firmly. "This is the opportunity I've been working toward my entire career." The table went silent. My mother's fork paused halfway to her mouth. David's eyebrows rose in surprise. Even the kids seemed to sense the shift in atmosphere. My father, who rarely spoke during these family discussions, cleared his throat. "Now, Madison, let's think about this practically. You've got a good job here, a nice house, family nearby. Is it really worth disrupting all of that for a temporary position?" "It's not temporary if I succeed," I replied, "and I intend to succeed." Michael exchanged a look with David, one of those silent brother communications that I'd seen thousands of times growing up. Michael leaned forward slightly. "Look, Maddie, we're just concerned about you being so far away in a new city where you don't know anyone. What if something happens? What if you get in over your head?" The concern in his voice sounded genuine, but underneath it I could hear the same old tune. Madison might not be capable of handling this on her own. Madison might need us to make decisions for her. Madison should stay where we can keep an eye on her. "I appreciate your concern," I said, standing up to clear the plates, a clear signal that dinner was over. "But I've already accepted the position. I leave next Monday." The room erupted in overlapping protests. My mother started listing all the reasons why this was a bad idea. Emma began talking about how difficult it would be to manage family gatherings without me. David started calculating the cost of keeping my house secure while I was away. But Michael's comment stopped me cold. "Well, if you're determined to do this crazy thing, at least let me and Sarah move in while you're gone. We've been saving up for a down payment on our own place, and this would help us save on rent for a few months. Plus, your house would be occupied and safe." I turned to look at him, dish towel in my hands, and for a moment I couldn't speak. My brother, who had borrowed over $15,000 from me in the past 5 years and had paid back exactly zero, was now suggesting that he and his wife should live in my house rent-free while I was working the hardest job of my career. "You want to move into my house?" I asked, making sure I'd heard correctly. "Just temporarily," Michael said quickly. 6 months, and we'd be doing you a favour, really. House sitting, you know? We'd take care of the place, handle any maintenance issues, maybe even do some improvements while we're there." My mother clapped her hands together as if this was the perfect solution. "Oh, that's wonderful. Michael and Sarah need the space. They're trying for a baby, you know, and you need someone to watch the house. It's perfect." I looked around the table at my family, all of them nodding in agreement, all of them so pleased with this arrangement that would benefit everyone except me. Michael would get free housing for 6 months. My parents would have their middle son closer to home again. Emma would still have a place to host family gatherings. And Madison? Well, Madison would be 3,000 miles away, working 16-hour days to prove herself in a new position, while her brother lived in her house and probably threw parties with his friends like he was 22 again instead of 35. "I'll think about it," I said, which in Madison speak had always meant yes. But I need time to convince myself it's a good idea. The following week was a blur of packing, briefings with my replacement at work, and endless phone calls from my family about the house arrangements. Michael had already started moving some of his things into my spare bedroom just to get a head start. Emma had asked if she could store some of her seasonal decorations in my garage. David wanted to know if he could use my address for his business mail while his office was being renovated. By the time I was boarding the plane to Los Angeles, I felt like I was leaving behind not just my house, but pieces of myself that my family had quietly claimed over the years. But what they didn't know, what none of them could have predicted, was that leaving home was exactly what I needed to remember who I really was. The first month in California was overwhelming. The job was everything I'd hoped for and more challenging than I'd imagined. I was managing teams across 3 different cities, overseeing million-dollar budgets and making decisions that affected hundreds of employees. For the first time in my life, people looked to me for leadership instead of assuming I would follow, and I discovered something remarkable. I was good at it, really good. The 15-hour days didn't exhaust me, they energized me. The high-pressure meetings didn't intimidate me, they excited me. When a crisis arose with one of our new office locations, I didn't freeze up or look around for someone else to handle it. I rolled up my sleeves and fixed it. My team started calling me the problem solver. When other departments had issues they couldn't resolve, they'd say, "Take it to Madison, she'll figure it out." It was intoxicating, being seen as competent and capable instead of accommodating and agreeable. Meanwhile, back home, the phone calls from my family became increasingly frequent and increasingly strange. The first call came 3 weeks into my assignment. It was my mother, and she sounded oddly nervous. "Hi, sweetheart. How's California treating you?" "It's great, Mom. Really challenging, but I'm loving it." "That's wonderful, dear. Listen, I wanted to ask you about something. Michael mentioned that you'd given him permission to have the mail forwarded to your house." I frowned, shifting the phone to my other ear as I walked through my temporary apartment. "What mail?" "Oh, just some business correspondence. His company is changing addresses, and there was some confusion with the postal service." Something in her tone didn't sit right with me, but I was exhausted from a 14-hour day and had an early morning meeting. "Sure, whatever, as long as he's not turning my house into a business office." My mother laughed, but it sounded forced. "Of course not, honey. Michael wouldn't do anything inappropriate." The second call came a month later, from my neighbour Mrs. Patterson, who lived next door and had become something of a friend over the years I'd lived there. "Madison, dear, I hope you don't mind me calling. I got your number from your mother." "Of course not, Mrs. Patterson. Is everything okay?" "Well, that's what I wanted to ask you. There's been quite a bit of activity at your house lately. Michael and his wife moved in, which your mother told me you'd arranged, but there have been contractors coming and going for the past 2 weeks. They're doing some kind of renovation work." My blood pressure spiked. "Renovation work?" "Oh, yes, quite extensive from the look of it. They had a dumpster delivered last week, and I saw them carrying out what looked like your old kitchen cabinets. I just wanted to make sure everything was all right. Your mother said you'd approved it all, but it seemed like quite a lot of work for a temporary house-sitting arrangement." After I hung up with Mrs. Patterson, I immediately called Michael. The phone rang 6 times before going to voicemail. I called again. Voicemail again. I tried his wife Sarah's number, also voicemail. Finally, I called my mother. "Mum, what's this about renovations at my house?" There was a long pause. "Oh, that. Well, Michael found some issues with the kitchen while he was staying there. Some water damage behind the cabinets. He thought it would be better to fix it now rather than let it get worse while you're away." "Water damage? How extensive?" "I'm not really sure about the details, honey. I don't understand construction things, but Michael said it was necessary." "And who's paying for these renovations?" Another pause. "Well, Michael is handling all of that. He said, since he's saving money by staying at your place, he could invest some of that savings into improvements." Red flags were going off in my head like a fire alarm, but I was 3,000 miles away and had a presentation to prepare for the next morning. "Mom, I want to talk to Michael directly. Have him call me tonight." "Of course, dear. I'm sure he'll explain everything." Michael never called that night, or the next night, or the night after that. The third call changed everything. It came on a Tuesday evening while I was working late in my temporary office, reviewing quarterly reports that would determine whether our California expansion was successful enough to make my promotion permanent. My phone rang, and I was surprised to see it was from a number I didn't recognize with my hometown area code. "Madison Henderson? This is James Morrison from Morrison & Associates Legal Services. I'm calling because there's been some unusual activity regarding your property at 1247 Maple Street." My heart stopped. "What kind of activity?" "Well, someone has filed paperwork with the county clerk's office indicating a change of ownership for your property. Normally this wouldn't be our concern, but the paperwork includes a signature that our handwriting analyst flagged as potentially fraudulent." I set down my pen and gave Mr. Morrison my full attention. "I'm sorry, what paperwork?" a quitclaim deed transferring ownership of your property from you to a Michael Henderson. The signature appears to match samples of your handwriting that we have on file from other documents, but there are some inconsistencies that raised red flags. Are you aware of this transfer?" The room started spinning. No, I am absolutely not aware of any transfer. I never signed anything." "I see. In that case, I think we need to have a more detailed conversation. Are you available to come in this week?" "I'm in California. I won't be back for another 2 months." "Ms. Henderson, I think you might want to reconsider that timeline. If this deed was filed fraudulently, time is of the essence in getting it reversed. And if someone is currently living in your home under the assumption that they now own it—" He didn't need to finish the sentence. I understood exactly what he was saying. My family hadn't just moved into my house while I was away. They were trying to steal it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my corporate apartment bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about every conversation I'd had with my family over the past 3 months. The questions about my house, the suggestions about Michael house sitting, the renovations that I'd never approved. They had planned this while I was working the hardest job of my life, trying to build a career that would finally give me the independence I'd always wanted. My own family was systematically stealing the one thing I owned that truly mattered to me. But as I lay there in the dark, something else began to grow alongside the hurt and betrayal. Something I'd never felt before when it came to my family. Anger, not the passive, swallowed-down frustration I'd felt countless times over the years. Real anger, the kind that burns hot and clear and focused. They thought Madison would never fight back. They thought Madison would find out what they'd done and just accept it, maybe cry a little, maybe complain, but ultimately give in like she always had. They thought they knew who Madison was, but they had no idea who I'd become. The next morning, I called my assistant and cleared my schedule for the day. Then I called Sarah Mitchell, the best real estate attorney I could find in my hometown. Sarah had graduated from Harvard Law School and specialized in property fraud cases. Her consultations weren't cheap, but at this point, money was the least of my concerns. "Ms. Henderson," Sarah said after I'd explained the situation, "what you're describing sounds like a clear case of property fraud. The quitclaim deed, the unauthorized renovations, the change of occupancy, these are all red flags for what we call adverse possession with fraudulent documentation. Can they actually steal my house this way? Not if we act quickly. The good news is that forging your signature on a quitclaim deed is a federal crime. The bad news is that every day this goes on, it becomes more complicated to reverse. They're essentially creating a paper trail that makes it look like you willingly transferred the property." I gripped my phone tighter. "What do we need to do?" "First, I need you to authorize me to represent you. Second, I'm going to file an emergency injunction to freeze any further transactions on the property. Third, we're going to need you to come back and make a statement to the police about the forged signature." "I can't come back yet. My job—" "Ms. Henderson," Sarah interrupted gently, "I understand your career is important, but if you lose this case, you'll lose your house. And if your family succeeds in this fraud, they could face serious criminal charges. Is there any way you can take emergency leave?" That afternoon, I sat in my supervisor's office, explaining why I needed to return to my hometown immediately. Jennifer Walsh had been my mentor since I'd started this assignment, and she'd watched me transform from a nervous regional manager into a confident team leader. "Madison, this is terrible. Of course you need to handle this. Take whatever time you need. But the quarterly reviews are next week, and the Phoenix office opening is—" "Madison," Jennifer's voice was firm but kind, In the 3 months you've been here, you've exceeded every target we set for you. You've handled crises that seasoned directors would have struggled with. 1 week away isn't going to change our assessment of your performance." She leaned forward across her desk. "But I have to ask, are you sure you're ready for this? From what you've told me about your family dynamics, this confrontation is going to be unlike anything you've dealt with before." I thought about that question as my plane descended into my hometown airport the next evening. Was I ready? The old Madison wouldn't have been. The old Madison would have called ahead, warned everyone she was coming, probably apologized for the inconvenience of reclaiming her own stolen property. But I wasn't the old Madison anymore. Sarah picked me up at the airport, and we spent the drive to my house going over our strategy. She had already filed the injunction and had scheduled a meeting with the district attorney's office for Monday morning. She'd also hired a private investigator to document who was currently living in my house and what changes had been made to the property. "The investigator took some photos yesterday," Sarah said, handing me a manila envelope. "I should warn you, they've made significant changes." I opened the envelope and felt my stomach drop. The photos showed my house, but it was almost unrecognizable. They'd painted the exterior a different color, from the soft blue I'd chosen to a stark white. They'd removed the flower beds I'd spent years cultivating and replaced them with gravel landscaping. The front porch where I used to drink my morning coffee had been enclosed and turned into what looked like an office space. But the interior photos were worse. My kitchen, the kitchen I'd saved for 2 years to renovate, had been completely torn out and replaced. The hardwood floors I'd refinished myself had been covered with laminate. They'd knocked down the wall between the living room and dining room, creating an open concept that completely changed the character of the house. "They've essentially remodeled your entire house," Sarah said quietly. "The estimated cost is somewhere between $40,000 and $60,000. Where did they get that kind of money? That's what we're going to find out. But Madison, you need to understand, they're not just living in your house. They've turned it into their house. This isn't going to be a simple conversation where you ask them to leave." I stared at the photos, feeling a mix of rage and heartbreak. This wasn't just theft, it was destruction. They had erased every trace of me from my own home. "There's something else," Sarah continued. "The investigator discovered that your brother has been telling people in the neighborhood that you sold him the house and moved to California permanently. He's shown several neighbors what appears to be a sales contract." "A fake sales contract?" "We won't know until we see it, but yes, most likely. The point is, they've created an entire narrative in which you willingly gave up the house. When you show up today, it's going to be more than just a family confrontation. You're going to be disrupting a story they've been telling for months." We pulled into my driveway, except it wasn't my driveway anymore. There was a different car parked there, a newer SUV that I didn't recognize. The garage door was open, and I could see that it had been converted into some kind of workshop space. My stomach was churning with anxiety, but underneath it was something else, a cold, steady determination. "Are you ready for this?" Sarah asked. I looked at my house, my stolen, transformed, barely recognizable house, and nodded. "Let's go get my home back." We walked up to the front door, and I rang the doorbell. My own doorbell. The absurdity of it almost made me laugh if this whole situation wasn't so devastating. The door opened, and Michael's wife Sarah stood there holding a dish towel. She looked shocked to see me, but tried to cover it with a bright smile. "Madison, oh my goodness, what are you doing here? We weren't expecting you." "I live here," I said simply. "Or at least I used to." Sarah's smile flickered. "Oh, well, come in. Michael will be so surprised to see you. We've been taking such good care of the place." I stepped into what had been my living room and felt like I was in a stranger's house. Everything was different. The paint, the furniture, even the smell. They'd made it completely their own. "Michael," Sarah called toward the back of the house. "Come see who's here." My brother appeared from what used to be my kitchen, wearing a tool belt and covered in sawdust. When he saw me, his face went through a series of expressions: surprise, guilt, and then something that looked almost like defiance. "Hey, Maddie, what brings you back? I thought you weren't coming home for another couple months." "Something came up," I said, looking around at the destruction of my home. "Michael, what have you done to my house?" His expression hardened slightly. "We've been making improvements. The place needed a lot of work, and since we were staying here anyway, improvements that I never authorized, using money that I didn't provide." Sarah the lawyer stepped forward. "Mr. Henderson, I'm Sarah Mitchell. I represent your sister. We need to have a conversation about the property ownership documentation you filed with the county clerk's office." The room went very quiet. Michael's wife looked confused, glancing between her husband and me. Michael's face had gone pale. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "The quitclaim deed," Sarah continued calmly. "The one with your sister's forged signature transferring ownership of this property to you. The one that constitutes federal fraud." "That's not... Madison agreed to..." "Michael," I interrupted, my voice steadier than I felt. "I never agreed to anything. I never signed anything. I never gave you permission to change so much as a light bulb in this house, let alone tear it apart and rebuild it." My sister-in-law was looking back and forth between us like she was watching a tennis match. "Michael, what is she talking about? You said Madison wanted to sell you the house." "She did," Michael said quickly. "We talked about it before she left. She said she might want to sell since she was going to be in California permanently." "That's a lie," I said, and the words came out harder than I'd intended. "Michael, I never said any such thing, and even if I had, don't you think I would have mentioned the $40,000 you apparently spent renovating it?" "Now wait just a minute," a voice said from behind me. I turned to see my parents walking through the front door. My mother was carrying a casserole dish, and my father had a newspaper under his arm. They looked like they'd been coming over for Sunday dinner. "Madison, sweetheart," my mother said, setting down the casserole and rushing over to hug me. "What a wonderful surprise! You didn't tell us you were coming home." I stepped back from her embrace. "Mum, did you know that Michael forged my signature to try to steal my house?" The room went dead silent. My mother's smile froze on her face. My father's newspaper slipped from his hand. "That's a very serious accusation, Madison," my father said slowly. "It's also true," Sarah the lawyer interjected. "We have handwriting analysis confirming that the signature on the quitclaim deed doesn't match your daughter's actual signature. We also have documentation showing that extensive renovations were done to this property without the owner's knowledge or consent." My mother sank into one of the chairs I didn't recognize, in what used to be my living room. "Michael, please tell me this isn't true." Michael ran his hands through his hair, leaving tracks in the sawdust. "Look, it's not as bad as it sounds. Madison was going to be gone for months, maybe permanently. The house was just sitting here empty. We needed a place to live, and we were taking care of the property. It was a win-win situation." "How is forging my signature a win-win situation?" I asked. "I didn't forge anything. I knew you would agree if you understood the whole situation. You always do. You're the most understanding person in our family." There it was, the assumption that had defined my entire relationship with my family. Madison will understand. Madison will agree. Madison always gives in. "But I don't agree," I said quietly. "I don't understand, and I'm not giving in." My mother looked up at me with tears in her eyes. "Madison, honey, this is just a misunderstanding. We're family. We can work this out." "Mom, they've been living in my house for 3 months. They've spent tens of thousands of dollars renovating it without my permission, and Michael filed legal documents claiming he owns it. That's not a misunderstanding. That's theft." My father cleared his throat. "Now, Madison, that's a strong word. Let's not say things we can't take back." I stared at him in disbelief. "Dad, they stole my house. What would you call it?" "A family disagreement that got out of hand," he replied. "These things happen. The important thing is that we fix it now." Sarah, the lawyer, stepped forward again. "Mr. and Mrs. Henderson, I need you to understand the seriousness of this situation. Property fraud is a felony. If we proceed with criminal charges, Michael could face up to 5 years in federal prison." My sister-in-law gasped and grabbed Michael's arm. "Prison? Michael, you said this was all legal? You said Madison had agreed to sell?" "She did agree," Michael insisted, but he was starting to sound desperate. "Maybe not in writing, but we talked about it. She knew we needed a place to live. She knew we were trying to save money for our own house." "So you decided to just take mine?" I asked. "It's not taking if you weren't using it." The words hung in the air like a slap. Not using it, as if my house was just some vacant property instead of the home I'd worked 4 jobs to buy, the place where I'd finally felt safe and independent. My mother was crying now. "Madison, please. Michael made a mistake, but sending him to prison won't solve anything. Can't we find another way?" I looked around the room at my family, really looked at them. My mother crying because her son might face consequences for his actions. My father treating felony fraud like a minor family squabble. My sister-in-law, who had apparently spent months living in a house that she knew didn't belong to her husband. And Michael, still insisting that he had done nothing wrong. For 32 years, I had prioritized their feelings over mine. I had swallowed my anger, suppressed my needs, and convinced myself that keeping the peace was more important than standing up for myself. But standing in my destroyed living room, surrounded by the evidence of their betrayal, I realized something profound. I didn't want to keep the peace anymore. I wanted justice. "Michael," I said calmly, "you have 24 hours to move out of my house." "Madison, be reasonable." "I am being reasonable. I'm giving you a day to pack your things and leave. If you're not gone by tomorrow evening, I'm filing criminal charges." My mother shot to her feet. "Madison Claire Henderson, how can you threaten your own brother like this?" "The same way he could forge my signature and steal my house," I replied. "Apparently, family loyalty only goes one way in this household." My father tried a different approach. "Madison, let's think about this practically. Michael and Sarah have put a lot of money into fixing up this place. If they leave now, you'll benefit from all their hard work without compensating them." I almost laughed. "Dad, they put money into a house they didn't own, without permission from the person who did own it. That's their problem, not mine." "But it's not fair." "Fair?" I turned to face him fully. Was it fair when I gave Michael my Europe savings when I was 16? Was it fair when I gave Emma my first apartment? Was it fair when I paid for Grandma's funeral and then got excluded from the family receiving line? Was any of that fair?" The room went quiet again. My family was staring at me like I'd become a stranger, and maybe I had. Maybe the old Madison had died somewhere between Los Angeles and here, and the person standing in this room was someone new. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was Sarah, the lawyer, who had stepped outside to make a call. "Police are here. Are you ready?" I looked at my family one more time. Michael was slumped in his chair, finally understanding that his little sister wasn't going to make this problem disappear for him. My parents were holding each other, whispering frantically. My sister-in-law was looking around the room like she was seeing it for the first time. "Yes," I texted back. "I'm ready." The next 24 hours were a blur of police statements, documentation, and phone calls. Sarah had been right. The evidence was overwhelming. Michael had not only forged my signature, but had also taken out a home equity loan against my property to pay for the renovations. He'd essentially stolen my house twice, once by claiming ownership and again by borrowing money against it. The police arrested him that evening on charges of fraud, forgery, and identity theft. As they led him away in handcuffs, my mother collapsed into my father's arms, sobbing. "Madison, please," she begged. "He's your brother. Don't let them do this to him." I watched the police car disappear down my street, the street where I'd planned to live for decades, where I'd imagined hosting birthday parties for future children and holiday dinners for my aging parents, the street where I'd thought I'd finally found my place in the world. "Mum," I said softly, "I didn't do this to him. He did this to himself." Over the next several days, the full extent of the damage became clear. The home equity loan Michael had taken out was for $75,000, more than I'd paid for the house in the first place. The renovations had been done without permits, which meant they would all have to be redone to meet code requirements. And because Michael had defaulted on the loan payments, the bank was now threatening foreclosure. My dream house had become a financial nightmare. Sarah, the lawyer, worked around the clock to untangle the legal mess. The forged documents were invalidated, the ownership was restored to me, and the bank agreed to work out a payment plan for the loan. But it would take years to fully recover from the financial damage Michael had done. Meanwhile, my family launched a campaign to convince me to drop the criminal charges. Emma showed up at my hotel room on Tuesday morning with her children in tow. "Madison, please, think about what this is doing to the kids. How am I supposed to explain to them why Uncle Michael is in jail?" "Maybe you could start by explaining why stealing is wrong," I suggested. David called repeatedly, leaving voicemails about family loyalty and forgiveness. My parents sent a letter through their pastor asking me to find it in my heart to show Christian mercy. But the conversation that finally broke my heart happened when my mother showed up at my hotel room on Wednesday evening. "Madison, I know you're angry and you have every right to be. Michael made a terrible mistake." "Mom, it wasn't a mistake. It was a calculated plan to steal my house." She sat down heavily in the chair by the window. "You're right. It was wrong, and I'm not going to make excuses for him anymore. But honey, you've already gotten your house back. You've proven your point. Isn't that enough?" I stared at her, this woman who had raised me, who had taught me to be kind and forgiving and accommodating. "Mum, if a stranger had done this to me, would you tell me to drop the charges?" "That's different." "How is it different?" "Because Michael is family." There it was, the core belief that had shaped my entire life. Family was different. Family got special treatment, special forgiveness, special exceptions to the rules that governed everyone else. "Mum," I said carefully, "for 32 years, I've treated you all like family. I've given you money when you needed it, space when you wanted it, understanding when you made mistakes. But when I needed support, when I needed someone to stand up for me, when I needed my family to treat me with basic respect, Where were you?" She started crying again. "We love you, Madison. You know we love you." "No, Mum. You love what I do for you. You love that I pay for things and host events and never complain when I get treated like a second-class family member. But that's not the same as loving me. That's not true. When I bought this house, did anyone congratulate me? When I got promoted, did anyone celebrate with me? When I was working 3 jobs to save money, did anyone offer to help? And when Grandma died, did anyone think maybe the granddaughter who took care of her and paid for her funeral deserved to stand with the family?" My mother wiped her eyes. We always knew you were strong enough to handle things on your own. You never seemed to need us the way the others did. I didn't need you because I wasn't allowed to need you. Every time I had a problem or a dream or a goal, it got pushed aside for someone else's crisis or celebration or convenience. We sat in silence for several minutes. Finally, my mother spoke again. "What can we do to fix this?" I looked at her, this woman who had shaped so much of who I was, and felt a profound sadness. "Mom, I don't think you can fix this, and I don't think I want you to try." "What does that mean?" "It means I'm done being the family ATM. I'm done hosting events that I pay for and clean up after. I'm done pretending that it's normal for a family to treat one member like a resource instead of a person." "You're cutting us off?" "I'm setting boundaries. If you want a relationship with me, it's going to be a real relationship, one where my feelings matter as much as everyone else's, where I'm included in family decisions instead of just expected to fund them, where I'm treated like a daughter and sister, not a backup plan." My mother stood up slowly. "And if we can't do that, then I guess we'll find out what kind of family we really are." After she left, I sat alone in my hotel room and cried, not just for my house, but for the family I'd thought I had, and the woman I'd had to become to protect myself from them. But underneath the sadness was something else, something I hadn't felt in years. Relief. 6 months later, I was sitting on the front porch of my house, my real house, the one I'd bought in California after my promotion became permanent. It was smaller than my old house, but it was mine in a way that the stolen house had never been. No one had keys but me. No one had claims on the space but me. No one could take it away from me. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah the lawyer. "Sentencing today, thought you'd want to know. Michael got 18 months, but he'll probably serve 8 with good behavior." I set the phone down and went back to reading my book. It was a Saturday morning, and I had nowhere to be but here, no one to take care of but myself, no family crisis to solve or event to host. The silence was beautiful. A few weeks later, I got a letter from Emma. She was getting divorced, she said, and needed a place to stay with the kids, just temporarily, just until she got back on her feet. She was sure I'd understand. After all, she was family. I read the letter twice, then filed it in my desk drawer without responding. Some lessons take 32 years to learn, but once you learn them, you never forget. Have you ever felt like you were just an ATM machine for your family? Like your feelings didn't matter as much as everyone else's needs? Sometimes people take advantage of your kindness, not because they need help, but because they know you won't say no. They count on your loyalty, your guilt, your fear of conflict to keep you giving long after you should have stopped. You deserve to be treated with respect, even by your own family, especially by your own family. If this story touched you, please subscribe to hear more stories about finding the courage to stand up for yourself. Because sometimes the most important person you need to save is yourself.